In this video, we are going to make these. These are clay balls. But why clay balls? What's the purpose? Is this a scam? Is it going to be a complete waste of time? Come on, who makes clay balls and then goes about making tutorials on how to make them? I'm not just going to make a few, but I'm going to make a lot of them. We will try 3 different approaches on how to make them and compare the outcome. To answer the obvious questions and for the uninitiated, these are called LECA, which stands for Lightweight Expanded Clay Aggregate. These are available commercially, but I decided to make them myself and I'm glad I did. I'll talk about why as the video goes on, but for now, let's dive in. Don't be fooled by the simplicity of LECA. These little balls make an excellent growing medium, especially for aquaponics and hydroponics. I made something similar to this like 35 years ago, but back then I did not make them as a growing medium, but I made them as an ammo for my slingshots, and they make excellent ammo for slingshots. Back then hobbies were different, playing gilli danda, flying kites and occasional target practice. Something like this. Stepping out of nostalgia to the present, the clay balls used as a growing medium are not just plain clay balls. It is made out of a clay aggregate, which means there is clay and there is something else mixed along with it. Secondly, it is fired at high temperatures, and that causes the clay balls to become porous, and this porosity is essential if these clay balls are going to be used as a growing medium. And that is where the name comes from, lightweight expanded clay aggregate. Armed with a broom, I cleaned the patch of garden where I planned to dig. I noticed termite activity here, and I already knew this part of the plot has clay. To confirm, I took a small pinch of soil and rolled it into a ball, and yes, it held together nicely. I started digging and collected these sticky chunks in a container. A quick note here, when you dig, you will find insects like earthworms. Please let them back into the soil, they will be on their way. Some clay clung to the spikes of the garden fork. I removed it and the texture felt just right. That's when I got this idea to try 3 different approaches. For the first approach, I rolled clay balls directly from the freshly dug clay. No fuss, just remove impurities by hand, feel it and simply roll. You won't believe how therapeutic this is. Calm, mindless, no alerts, no notification, just birds and a ton load of relaxation. For the second approach, I collected some soil in a breathable gunny bag and kept it aside. This would be used later for a dry method clay aggregate. The third approach, this is a little bit messy. Water is added to the soil and mixed thoroughly. This muddy water is then passed through a sieve. Large particles, organic matter, insects and even earthworms are filtered out and returned to where they belong. This setup is allowed to rest for a day. By the next day, the clay particles have settled to the bottom. You can see the clear water on top, and now we need to remove this water. I did this using a syringe and a length of leveling tube. Insert one end of the tube into the water and bring the other end below the container level. Now when we pull the water with the syringe, once it starts flowing, remove the syringe. Gravity takes over. Not fast, but simple, clean, effective and effortless. The batch collected in the gunny bag is spread out in a large container and left to dry. Occasionally turning the soil with the rake helps it dry faster and also reveals any insects that may have crawled in. It's been raining for a couple of days and this batch of wet clay is nowhere getting close to getting dry. So what I've done is I've taken a paint bucket, I've cut the bottom and I've added this tray so that water doesn't spill out. I've lined up the inside of this bucket with a piece of cloth and tied it with a bungee cord so that it stays in place. I've poured in all the clay, the wet clay. Now you can see that the water is oozing out, it's getting filtered out. This way the clay might dry faster and we can get to work much sooner. It goes without saying, if you're in a mosquito prone region, it's best to cover the wet clay setup with a piece of mesh or some kind of a net. You don't want insects to find shelter in the water or in the soil. At the same time, you don't want mosquitoes to breed in there. Once they make larvae, it's not going to be a good sight and you will want to use that clay any longer. So it's always best to cover it with some kind of a mesh cloth or a net so that water can evaporate. At the same time, it can keep the mosquitoes and insects out of the way. The sun was out in the morning, but it is all gone cloudy now. So here is what I've done. I've spread a batch of this dry batch here on a piece of this green fabric that is used for gardening, whatever. So I've spread enough batch, only enough batch, so that if it rains, I should be able to carry it to the shelter. Also, I've broken these down into smaller lumps as much as I could and let the sun dry, and we'll continue after that. While all this is getting ready, let's complete another step. Next, I decided to make a plaster slab. A plaster slab is a slab made out of plaster of Paris, and the purpose of this slab is to absorb excess water from the clay that is placed on top so that the clay can dry evenly and get to the right consistency to proceed further. Now, this step isn't strictly necessary, but since I have access to clay, why not? I'm using marine plywood strips, metal wire mesh, and 4 PVC footing. The extra long screws joining the wooden frame are deliberate. Together with the wire mesh, this makes the board stronger and less likely to crack when wet. The frame is placed on the table with the wire mesh positioned halfway through the thickness of the frame. I mixed 5 kilos of plaster of Paris with water. Once plaster meets water, the clock starts ticking. I poured the mix into the frame and within half an hour, the slab had set. Not fully dry, but solid enough. I left it like this for a couple of days. To dry, obviously. Next, we need to prepare the aggregate or the temper. In pottery, temper is added to clay because clay expands when heated and it contracts when cooled down, and this thermal movement causes cracks. To prevent this, a finely ground material, often finely ground crushed pottery, is added to the mix. I didn't have that, and for the purpose of what we are making here, I found something close enough: red bricks. To crush the bricks, I used an improvised heavy iron roller. First, I broke the bricks into smaller, manageable chunks, laid them on an iron plate, and then rolled the iron roller over them. The crushed material was then sieved to separate the fine brick powder. Just like before, I crushed the dry soil using the iron roller and sieved out the fine powder. To this, I added 10 to 15% of sawdust, 20% of brick powder. Once thoroughly mixed, I added water gradually and began kneading it into a clay dough. Add water slowly. This part matters. Here is a simple test. Roll a thin rope of clay. If it doesn't fall apart easily, it is ready. Now we roll them into smaller pebbles. Pinch some clay, place it on your palm and roll it away. It took me about 90 minutes to make this batch. I let them dry overnight and then continued drying them in shade for almost a week. The wet clay placed on the plaster slab lost excess moisture and reached a perfect working consistency. Once again, I mixed in brick powder and sawdust. The downside in this method here is that it needs thorough kneading. I repeated the process of rolling small pebbles. Now we have 3 batches of clay balls made using 3 different methods. Now it's time to fire them. I had collected wood to fire them in open flame, but there is a drawback in this method. Open fires hardens the clay, but they may not reach temperatures high enough for the proper expansion. So I made this. Call it a bloom, a kiln, a furnace, or just a setup that gets the job done. So the bottom layer is small twigs. Then I added a layer of charcoal. Then the first batch of clay balls. More charcoal, more twigs, and then fire it up. Once the charcoal was burning well, I covered it with a clay lid. An electric blower supplied the air needed for the intense heat. After the charcoal turned to ash, everything was allowed to cool gradually. Once the setup was cool, I collected the clay balls, or at this stage we can call it LECA. I repeated this process for the other 2 batches as well. And here is the final result. In the first batch, the heat was probably too high. Some balls have charred and a few even developed a glassy, powdery surface. And it doesn't have much strength. It can come apart quite easily with gentle pressure. See? Kind of breaks. and tap it with a hammer and it breaks very easily, not usable. But you can see the inside is formed into some kind of crystals or something like that. It's melted, fused, charred, and it is completely non-usable. So the soil itself is not the problem. The lesson learned here is overheating is the problem. Let's move on to the other batch. This one is made from the dry batch of the clay that we had prepared. And here again you can see that some of them are completely charred, some are half burnt, and some have not been influenced by the heat at all. So these are from the wet batch of clay that we had prepared. Again, the heat is the culprit. The heat was not even. Some of them are charred, some of them have some kind of a glass structure on the surface of the balls, but they are not as brittle as the first batch. The second batch and the third batch are quite strong though. So if you break it, it does take a bit of an effort. And again, some of them have the insides charred and the outside is like a shell. And in comparison to an unfired clay, somehow it feels lighter. I'm not weighing them on a scale, but by just the feel of it, the ones that are fired are feeling a little bit lighter than the one that are unfired. I do not have commercial grade LECA balls to compare how the insides would look like. So I'm sharing this video as it is. You can tell me how it looks like or whether this is right or not in the comment section below. Overall, this project doesn't need any fancy tools and it's a great non-screen time activity and you're adding real value to your garden. And that's a win-win, right? So here is the part where I ask you to subscribe to my channel, but I need to tell you something. I pick up a topic and I make 1 or 2 videos and then I move on, and my channel has got a lot of different videos on a lot of different themes and topics. I thought I need to inform you about that. I hope you like this video, and if you do, please share this video. I will see you in another video very soon. Until then, bye-bye.